Picture this. It's the year 451 AD. The most powerful empire the world has ever known, Rome, is on its knees, trembling before a single man, a man who drinks from the skulls of his enemies, a man whose very name makes emperors offer their sisters in marriage just to buy peace, a man so terrifying that medieval Europeans believed he was sent by God himself as divine punishment for their sins. His name? Attila, the Scourge of God. But here's what will shock you. This legendary conqueror, this nightmare of civilizations, this man who commanded an empire stretching from Germany to China, we don't even know what he really looked like. No authentic portraits exist. No statues were ever made. It's as if history itself was too afraid to capture his image. Today, we're diving deep into one of history's most mysterious and terrifying figures. We'll uncover the truth behind the legends, explore the secrets of his unstoppable military tactics, and reveal the shocking way his empire collapsed overnight. Because Attila's story isn't just about conquest and destruction. It's about power, psychology, and how one man nearly changed the course of Western civilization forever. So buckle up, because this is going to be intense. Let's meet the man who made emperors beg for mercy. Attila was born around 406 AD, somewhere in the vast Eurasian steppes, in what we call today's Hungary or Ukraine. But forget everything you've seen in movies about barbarians living in primitive conditions. The Huns were sophisticated nomadic warriors with a complex social structure and devastating military innovations that would make modern generals weep with envy. From birth, Attila was trained for war. Hun children learned to ride horses before they could walk properly. By age 5, they were shooting bows from horseback. By 10, they were participating in raids. This wasn't just military training. This was a complete psychological conditioning program that created the most feared cavalry force the ancient world had ever seen. But here's where it gets interesting. Attila wasn't always a supreme leader. In fact, he started as co-ruler with his older brother, Bleda, around 434 AD when they inherited power from their uncle, King Rugila. For 11 years, they ruled together, expanding Hun territory and extracting massive tribute payments from the Eastern Roman Empire. Then, in 445 AD, something happened. Bleda mysteriously died during a hunting expedition. The official story? An accident. The reality? Most historians believe Attila assassinated his own brother to consolidate absolute power. This wasn't just fratricide, it was a calculated political move. Attila understood something fundamental about power. Divided authority creates weakness. He needed total control to execute his grand vision. And what was that vision? Nothing less than the complete subjugation of both Roman empires and the creation of a Hun superpower that would dominate the known world. The moment Attila became sole ruler, everything changed. He immediately restructured the Hun military, incorporated conquered peoples into his army, and developed an intelligence network that would make the CIA jealous. He had spies in every major city, informants in every court, and agents provocateurs spreading fear and disinformation throughout Roman territories. Now, let's talk about what made Attila truly brilliant and truly terrifying. This wasn't just some bloodthirsty barbarian swinging a sword. Attila was a master psychologist who understood that the greatest weapon isn't steel, it's fear. Contemporary Roman historians described him with a mixture of horror and grudging respect. The Gothic historian Jordanes wrote that Attila was short of stature with a broad chest, large head, small eyes, a thin beard, and a flat nose. He had a proud step and demeanor, and constantly looked around, radiating menace even when standing still. But here's the genius part. Attila deliberately cultivated his terrifying image. He understood that if people believed he was invincible, he became invincible. He spread stories about himself, that he possessed the sword of Mars, the ancient sword of the war god, which granted him divine right to conquer the world. Whether this sword existed or not didn't matter. What mattered was that his enemies believed it existed. He also practiced what we call today total war psychology. When Attila's army approached the city, he would send envoys ahead with a simple message. Surrender now and pay tribute, and you'll live. Resist, and every man, woman, and child will be slaughtered, your city burned to ground, and the earth salted so nothing will ever grow there again. The brutal part? He actually followed through. Cities that resisted were annihilated so completely that some disappeared from history entirely, their locations lost even today. But cities that surrendered, they were often treated relatively well, allowed to keep governing themselves as long as they paid tribute and provided troops when requested. This created a devastating dilemma for his enemies: surrender and survive but live in humiliation and poverty, or resist and face total extinction. Most chose survival, and each city that surrendered without a fight made the next city more likely to surrender too. It was psychological warfare at its finest. Let's get into the tactics that made Attila's army nearly unstoppable. The Hun military machine was unlike anything the Romans had ever faced, and it exploited every weakness in the traditional Roman military system. First, mobility. Roman armies were heavily armored infantry forces that moved slowly, needed supply trains, and required fortified camps each night. Hun cavalry could cover 80 to 100 miles per day, lived off the land, and could fight effectively while outnumbered because of their superior maneuverability. The Huns pioneered the composite bow, a weapon made from wood, horn, and sinew that was shorter than traditional longbows, but incredibly powerful. A Hun warrior could shoot accurately while riding at full gallop, turning every soldier into a mobile artillery unit. They perfected the Parthian shot, turning in the saddle to shoot backward while retreating, making even their retreats deadly. But Attila's real innovation was combined arms warfare. He didn't just rely on Hun cavalry. He incorporated Germanic infantry, Gothic heavy cavalry, and siege engineers from various conquered peoples. His army became a multicultural, multi-role military force that could adapt to any situation. When facing Roman armies in open battle, Attila used a brilliant tactic called a feigned retreat. His cavalry would attack, then appear to flee in panic. The Romans, thinking they'd won, would break formation to pursue. Then the Hun cavalry would wheel around, shower the disorganized Romans with arrows, and charge while they were vulnerable. This tactic destroyed multiple Roman legions. For siege warfare, Attila recruited engineers who understood Roman fortification systems and developed mobile battering rams and siege towers specifically designed to counter Roman defensive architecture. He also mastered siege psychology, surrounding a city, cutting off all supplies, and simply waiting while starvation and disease did most of the work. Perhaps most importantly, Attila understood logistics and intelligence. He never attacked without knowing the exact strength of enemy forces, the state of their supplies, and the political situation in their territory. He often invaded where his enemies were already weakened by internal conflicts, essentially kicking them when they were down. Between 440 and 450 AD, Attila launched a series of campaigns against the Eastern Roman Empire that brought the empire to its knees. He sacked major cities including Nisus, Serdica, and Philippopolis. The Eastern Roman Emperor Theodosius II was forced to pay a humiliating tribute, 350 pounds of gold per year, plus a one-time payment of 6,000 pounds of gold to secure peace. Think about that for a moment. The richest empire in the world was paying protection money to a nomadic warlord. It was the ancient equivalent of a superpower paying off a terrorist organization, except Attila commanded hundreds of thousands of warriors and controlled territory larger than Western Europe. But here's where things get really interesting. In 450 AD, Attila received a letter that would change history. It came from Honoria, sister of the Western Roman Emperor Valentinian III. She was engaged to a Roman senator she didn't want to marry, and in desperation, she sent Attila her ring and a plea for help. Attila's response? He claimed Honoria had proposed marriage and that half the Western Roman Empire was therefore his dowry. When Valentinian refused, Attila declared war. Now, was Attila actually interested in marrying Honoria? Probably not. But he was definitely interested in having a pretext to invade the Western Empire. This letter gave him exactly the propaganda tool he needed. He could claim he was defending the honor of a Roman princess, rather than simply invading for conquest. In 451 AD, Attila invaded Gaul, modern France. With an army estimated between 200,000 and 500,000 warriors, the largest military force assembled in Europe since Alexander the Great. He burned and pillaged his way through the countryside, destroying cities that had stood for centuries. This forced an unprecedented alliance. The Western Roman general Flavius Aetius, himself a former hostage of the Huns who understood their tactics, formed a coalition with the Visigoths, Alans, Franks, and other Germanic tribes. For perhaps the first time in history, Romans and their traditional barbarian enemies fought side by side against a common threat. The two armies met at the Catalonian plains, near modern-day Châlons-en-Champagne, France, in what became one of the bloodiest battles in ancient history. Contemporary sources claim between 165,000 and 300,000 men died in a single day of fighting, numbers that wouldn't be matched until World War I. The battle was essentially a draw, but strategically, it was a Roman victory because Attila was forced to retreat. For the first time, he had been stopped. The myth of Hun invincibility was shattered, but Attila wasn't finished. In 452 AD, Attila launched an even more audacious campaign, the invasion of Italy itself. He crossed the Julian Alps and descended on northern Italy like a thunderstorm. City after city fell. Aquileia, one of the wealthiest cities in the empire, was besieged, captured, and so thoroughly destroyed that survivors fled to nearby lagoons, founding what would eventually become Venice. Attila's army swept south, burning and looting. Milan fell. Pavia fell. The road to Rome itself lay open. Emperor Valentinian III prepared to flee to Constantinople. The Western Roman Empire seemed finished. Then something extraordinary happened. Pope Leo I, Leo the Great, traveled north to meet Attila personally. What happened at this meeting is one of history's greatest mysteries. No reliable contemporary account describes their conversation. All we know is that after this meeting, Attila turned around and withdrew from Italy without attacking Rome. Why? Medieval legend says Leo performed a miracle and frightened Attila away. The more likely explanation? Leo probably offered massive tribute payments and reminded Attila that Rome had already been sacked by Alaric the Visigoth in 410 AD, and Alaric had died shortly afterward, suggesting that attacking Rome brought a divine curse. Attila, who was deeply superstitious, may have believed this. Or perhaps his army was weakened by plague, and he used the meeting as a face-saving excuse to withdraw. We'll never know for certain. What we do know is that this was the last time Roman civilization stood on the brink of complete annihilation during ancient times. One man, whether through diplomacy, divine intervention, or sheer psychological manipulation, saved Rome from its greatest external threat. After withdrawing from Italy, Attila returned to his capital north of the Danube. In 453 AD, despite having multiple wives already, he decided to marry a young Gothic woman named Ildiko. This wasn't unusual. Hun leaders often married for political alliances, but this particular marriage would become one of history's most mysterious stories. On the night of his wedding feast, Attila celebrated excessively. The next morning, his guards noticed he hadn't emerged from his chamber. When they finally broke down the door, they found Attila dead in his bed with Ildiko beside him, terrified and unharmed. The official account, recorded by the Roman historian Priscus based on eyewitness reports, says Attila died from a massive nosebleed. He was drunk, lying on his back, and choked on his own blood. No signs of violence were found on his body, but was it really that simple? Some historians suspect Ildiko assassinated him, possibly as part of a Gothic conspiracy. Others suggest he was poisoned by enemies within his own court. Still others believe it was simply a medical event, perhaps a ruptured esophageal varix, which can cause sudden massive bleeding in heavy drinkers. What makes this death so fascinating is its historical impact. Attila, who had survived countless battles, who had outsmarted emperors and generals, who had built an empire through sheer force of will, died in his bed on his wedding night, not from an arrow, not from a sword, but from something as mundane as a nosebleed. The irony is almost poetic. The man who had caused rivers of blood to flow died drowning in his own blood. Here's where the story becomes a cautionary tale about personality-driven empires. Within months of Attila's death, the Hun Empire collapsed. His three sons, Elik, Dengizik, and Ernak, immediately began fighting over succession. The subject peoples, who had been held together only by fear of Attila, rebelled. Germanic tribes that had been forced to fight for the Huns turned on their former masters. At the Battle of Nideo in 454 AD, just 1 year after Attila's death, a coalition of Germanic tribes defeated the Huns decisively. Elik, Attila's eldest son, was killed in the battle. The remaining Huns splintered into small groups, some retreating back to the steppes, others being absorbed into other tribes. By 469 AD, just 16 years after Attila's death, the Hun Empire had completely disappeared from history. It's as if they had never existed. Their cities were abandoned, their records destroyed, their culture absorbed by other peoples. This raises a crucial question. Was Attila's empire real, or was it just an illusion sustained by one man's personality and military genius? Historians debate this. Some argue the Huns never truly integrated their conquered peoples or built lasting institutions. They simply demanded tribute and threatened violence. Others suggest that given more time, Attila might have created a true empire with administrative structures and cultural unity. We'll never know. What we do know is that personality cults, no matter how powerful, rarely survive the death of the personality at their center. So what's Attila's real legacy? How should we remember this controversial figure? In the West, he became a symbol of barbarism and destruction. The term Hun became synonymous with savage invaders, so much so that British propaganda in World War I called German soldiers Huns to dehumanize them. But in Hungary and parts of Central Asia, Attila is remembered as a great national hero. Hungarian kings claimed descent from him for centuries. His name means little father in Gothic, and some traditions remember him as a just ruler who protected his people and punished corrupt Roman officials. The truth, as always, is complex. Attila was a product of his time, an era when might made right, when empires were built on conquest, and when showing mercy was often seen as weakness. By the standards of his era, he wasn't particularly more brutal than many Roman emperors or Persian shahs. What made Attila exceptional was his strategic brilliance, his psychological insight, and his ability to unite diverse peoples under his leadership. He understood that empire isn't just about military power. It's about perception, fear, and making your enemies defeat themselves before battle is even joined. He also understood something that many modern leaders forget, that overwhelming force, decisively applied, is often more merciful than prolonged conflict. Cities that surrendered immediately suffered far less than those that resisted. From a military perspective, Attila's tactics influenced warfare for centuries. The use of light cavalry, psychological warfare, combined arms tactics, and mobile warfare all became standard military doctrine. Even today, military academies study Hun cavalry tactics. Despite centuries of research, Attila remains enigmatic. We still don't know. Where exactly was he born? The steppes are vast, and pinpointing his birthplace is impossible. What did he actually look like? The descriptions we have are vague and possibly distorted by Roman prejudice. Was he actually short, or did Romans just say that to diminish him? We'll never know. Where is he buried? Legend says his followers diverted a river, buried him in the riverbed with massive treasure, then redirected the river back to hide the location. Hundreds of expeditions have searched for Attila's tomb. None have succeeded. Some believe it's somewhere in Hungary. Others think it's in Romania or Ukraine. The treasure of the Huns, if it exists, remains one of history's great lost treasures. Did he actually possess the sword of Mars? Was there a real legendary sword, or was it just propaganda? What really happened in his meeting with Pope Leo? What was said? What agreements were made? History has lost these crucial details. And perhaps most intriguingly, what would have happened if Attila had lived longer? Could he have conquered Rome? Would Western civilization, as we know it, exist? These counterfactual questions fascinate historians and writers to this day. Attila's story is ultimately about the power of one individual to change history, for better or worse. He altered the trajectory of Western civilization. He accelerated the fall of Rome, reshaped the ethnic map of Europe, and created legends that still resonate 1,600 years later. But his story is also a warning. Empires built on personality alone are fragile. Terror as a governing strategy creates shallow loyalty, and absolute power, no matter how brilliantly wielded, ultimately corrupts and isolates. Attila died in his bed drunk on his wedding night, a surprisingly mundane end for a man who had terrorized continents. His empire collapsed almost immediately, proving that institutions matter more than individuals, that culture outlasts conquest, and that fear while effective in the short term, cannot sustain an empire indefinitely. Yet we still remember him. We still speak his name with a mixture of horror and admiration. In a strange way, Attila achieved a kind of immortality, not through the empire he built, which vanished like morning mist, but through the legend he became. He wanted to be remembered as the greatest conqueror who ever lived. Whether he achieved that goal is debatable, but he certainly remembered. And in the end, perhaps that's all any of us can hope for, to be remembered, for good or ill, long after we're gone. So here's my question for you. If you could go back in time and ask Attila one question, what would it be? Would you ask him about his military tactics, his childhood, his regrets? What really happened with Pope Leo? Or would you ask him if he ever feared that his empire would collapse so quickly after his death? Drop your answers in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious what you want to know from one of history's most mysterious and powerful figures. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into Attila's world, imagine what other incredible historical stories we could explore together. From the secrets of ancient Rome to the mysteries of lost civilizations, from forgotten conquerors to unsung heroes. History is full of amazing stories that deserve to be told. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Every week, we bring you these deep researched, fascinating explorations of history's most intriguing characters and events. Your subscription helps us continue creating this content and diving even deeper into the stories that shaped our world. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode, where we explore another chapter of humanity's incredible, terrifying, and inspiring story. Until then, remember, we're all writing history right now. The question is, what kind of story do we want to tell?